Try that? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so you've seen the title. Who is this for? This isn't for developers using Python. This is for developers developing Python, just like Raymond's talk yesterday. It's especially for those who might want to start developing Python. Maybe intermediates and experts have not thought about it this way before. I hope you'll get something from it too. And if you already know it all, tell me something I don't know. A word from my sponsors, this was supported research. And you can look it up if you like. Who am I? I'm a social scientist, an economist, or university professor. As Greg Wilson just told you, I'm part of the problem. Normally, I would talk a little bit less fast and take a lot more time. I've learned a lot from Python conferences. I really have. My subfield is information incentives and strategic behavior in organizations, and that's sort of what I'm going to tell you about. This is based on a funded study of Python development practices, and I've been a wannabe since PEP 263. Why listen to me? My peripheral participation in Python development is more than a decade over. I've talked extensively with several core developers in the process of my research. I don't claim comprehensive knowledge of free and open source software development practices, nor Python internals. And I've got another disclaimer I have to make. I teach at Matz's alma mater. Ruby fans? Yeah. Here are my excuses. Oops, should have checked that first. The first one, I broke a bunch of ribs, 7 of them, in multiple places in October. And so my preparations haven't been so great. The second one is Raymond. He gave the first half of my talk. The third one is Safia. After fixing my talk at 8:30 this morning, Safia gave the rest of my talk. And so what am I going to do? Okay. Sorry, Safia, you got cut off. So what this talk is about. Yesterday, Raymond told you what core developers do. They review. They don't code. Everybody codes. We code because it's fun. The work part, the part that makes Python great, is people who look at the code and say, you can make that better. Okay, 15 years ago, they probably said that sucks. We've learned a lot since then. There are a lot of projects, my alma mater of Emacs and XEmacs, they still say, your code sucks. We've learned not to do that here, and that's what this talk is about. Now, to become a senior core developer, you need to convince other senior core developers that you're a good reviewer. But to become a core developer, all you need to do is review. There are lots of issues. There's participation on the mailing lists. I'll talk about that later. These are the things that anybody who's interested can do. And as Raymond told you yesterday, we need you to tell us about it. Today I want to talk about not the what, but the how. I want to talk about the process and the community that reviewing is embedded in. That means management and bureaucracy. Yeah, I know how you all feel about management and bureaucracy, but what I want to tell you is that we're working really hard to make sure that in Python, management and bureaucracy serve the project. They're useful. They get things done. They're not about forcing the project to do what you want. I also have to genially disagree with Safia. There are rock stars. There really are rock stars. Not just as developers, though, but as management. And we in Python are fortunate to have a bunch of them, starting, of course, with Guido. Early history. Guido, also known as GVR and the BDFL, wanted a reasonably performant language suitable for scripts, for real programming, and for education. This is back in the 1980s. Okay. As Greg told you a few minutes ago, we haven't done a great job since like the 1950s when programming and so on really got started. But there are a few people who have really tried hard, and Guido's one of them. Python started development in the late 80s, external release in the early 90s. You can see sponsor history in the license documentation. Sad to say, free and open source software needs licenses, needs lawyers. We've got a good one. And around 1999, this is my connection, Eric Raymond promoted his FetchMailConf, which is where I got in. I read his blog and found out that Python was cool and interesting and had some weird stuff in it, and I love weird stuff. Red Hat chose Python for many system utilities. Anybody here remember 1.5.2 and all the joy that caused when you wanted to use 2.2 or something like that? Learned a lot. Python added Unicode in 1.6, and that was really important to me because I live in Japan. Japan is a country with its share of masochists. They're flagellants, and what they flagellate themselves with is a cat of 5 encodings. 5 encodings in daily use. If you're a Microsoft user, there are 2 more you have to worry about. Now, Python 1.6 was a final report on the work done with CNRI support. And if you look at the announcement to 2.0 after a bow to CNRI, the first thing in that announcement was not Unicode. It wasn't even list comprehensions. It was a new development process. They're going to use SourceForge. They're going to open the CVS tree to more committers. There was an informal design of a process of rolling consensus, not modeled on, but it turned out to be convergent evolution with Apache's process. If you look at the dev list today, you'll see -1, +1. You'll see the occasional +1,000 or -1,000. We don't pay attention to those. The official designation of the BDFL. It was sort of around before that, but in that announcement, Guido was actually officially in a publicly released document denoted benevolent dictator for life. And it also talks about the PEPs. And in the PEPs, there are 2 interesting statements. Writing patches is easier than design. Now, where have we heard that before? Thank you, Raymond. And design and review result in lengthy mailing list threads, and that, as Raymond mentioned, has become a problem because the number of reviewers is small and doesn't scale. We need more reviewers. Come on, guys. Volunteers, get your hands up. No, forget it. And then it comes to Unicode and list comprehensions. So what Guido and, I think it's Andrew Kuchling, and there was a third party involved in writing that. What they cared about was, we have a better way of bringing software to you. Maybe that was a first in the community, in the open source community. You know, Linux kernel, greatest thing since sliced bread. OpenBSD, more secure than anything you can imagine. All that kind of stuff. But what they cared about was, we do a better job of bringing the software to you, and we're trying to bring you into our development process. Now, where I came in, early Unicode support had a glaring flaw. Python source, including strings and comments, had to be ASCII. You could sort of fake it with Latin 1, but that was really kind of shaky. And aside here, Alex Martinelli wrote an elegant and ardent post arguing that as a rule, comments should still be in English. And in modern Python, where we talk about diversity and things like that, you sort of have to wonder. Unfortunately, his arguments are still valid. For the same reason we need Unicode, we need unilanguage. And for practical purposes today, that's English. Maybe tomorrow it will be Chinese, but it probably won't be Japanese or Swahili. The answer to that was PEP 263. Barry Walshaw called me in to consult, and I made an idiot of myself. Guido had to actually tell me, who are you to talk about what Pythonicity might be? But it was cool. I deserved it, and I recognized that, and I decided to stay around. So up to this point, we've been talking about how to develop the language. These were the things that Guido and the other guys who were important then, Raymond, Barry, and a bunch of others, Alex, What were the values of language development? Well, Python is multimodal. It can handle object-oriented programming, it can handle functional programming, but it's basically imperative. Why? Because scripts are where we all started. Okay, a few of us are geniuses, and we thought in terms of continuations and recursion from the get-go. We were sort of born that way, like Mozart. But most of us, and I'm the second us, not the first us, think in terms of step by step. We do things one at a time, and that's how we get things done. And that's where we started. So Python encourages that way of thinking, and that's the basic way syntax works in Python. Another aspect of the values in language development is built-ins are preferred to syntax. If you try to propose new syntax on a Python list today, you are likely to get 5 or 6 different quotations from the Zen to explain why you shouldn't, plus a few that aren't even in the Zen. We're trying to work on that, but there are issues here, and I'll talk to that a little bit more later. Now, another one is backwards compatibility is highly valued in Python, both in syntax and in the standard library APIs and in semantics. All of those things we really care about. And if you've participated in core development stuff, you know how painful it was to maintain 6 different branches at the same time. We had to maintain both 2.x and 3.y, and in each case, because of the backward compatibility promise, we were continuously maintaining 2.2, 2.3, 2.4. 2.4 was the current one where we're bringing in the new features, but 2.2 and 2.3 were maintained at the same time because there were minor incompatibilities and people needed to keep those up, and we wanted the security and the bug fixes to go into those too. And so 6 branches being maintained at the same time. Most people didn't have to actually backport 6 times, but sometimes that did happen. Performance regressions are acceptable in a 0.0 release, but you kind of have to promise that you know how to fix it by 0.1. Not quite promise, but that's really important. Python has to be performant. There are lots of people doing real-world stuff out there, and if there's a big regression, we will hear about it from outside and from inside. There are a lot of people now who are working hard on that, and we're really thankful to people like Victor Stinner and was it Donald Stuft who was involved in speed.org? Zachary Ware, was that? Speed.python.org, and so on. We care about performance, not as much as some people would like, but we do. We have the style guides. It's important to us that you be able to read our code. And that means all of our code, everything in the standard library, in the definitions of things and so on. We have a consistent style, and we actually do enforce that. Not to the point of craziness. Every summer for GSOC, we have somebody propose to go through the standard library and bring it up to current style guide. No, not going to happen, because that makes it harder for us to read. We care about our readability as well as yours, but these are things that we care about. And Raymond said a lot more about all this, more than I know, more than I will ever know probably. So where are we going? Well, software processes. Software processes are important. Conway's law says that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs that mirror the communication structure of those systems. Python has been conscious of its communication system since the word go. This is why we have PEPs. This is why we have many mailing lists. The rest of this you probably already know, so who cares? And let's continue. In free and open source software, the original idea was process light, less process, more code, more product. But massively distributed development means every user is a contributor. We need to do something to coordinate those people. We have open development, which means that every user is a literary critic of your code. And Raymond's point yesterday was, you are every user. Be critical of our code. Tell us about it, because there are lots of things that we just don't see because of who we are. Another aspect is reusability, and this is true for all FOSS. It's designed in modularity. It's not just cargo cult. It encourages quality while decreasing long-run cost. At least that's the theory. So how does a Pythonic process work? First of all, for historical reasons and because he's Guido, we have the benevolent dictator for life. Guido is not just a great programmer, although he probably is. I'm not qualified to judge his code. The important thing is that he provides a consistent view of what a Pythonic programming language looks like. And when he says that Python 3 is a natural evolution from Python 2, that's important. The PEP process is important. I'll talk a little bit about that later. Conscious automation is something that has been part of the Python process for a long time. Trackers, repositories, review tools, buildbot, and speed. We're on our 4th repo mode. We had a CVS at CNRI, and we moved to SourceForge with CVS. Then at SourceForge, we moved to Subversion. Then we moved to a self-hosted Mercurial. And now we're going to move to GitHub. And all of these were highly controversial and required a lot of work. I could ask Brett to tell you about the work, and he could go on for the rest of the afternoon. But he's got to talk, so I won't do that. Channel discipline is another. We have many mailing lists and other ways of communicating within the development community. About the benevolent dictator, Guido van Rossum, what else can I say? He's the arbiter of Pythonicity. Syntax, APIs, coding style. He's a skilled delegator, and that's really fascinating. Like Linus Torvalds at the Linux kernel, Guido has found people who are better than he is in many areas. And they are the people who make most of the decisions in those areas. In the end, if it comes down to push and shove, style versus substance, Guido makes those decisions. But most of the time, other people are making these decisions nowadays. And that's really important. The founders with veto power are Legion, RMS, of course, Larry Wall. Larry Wall is interesting because he abdicated as soon as he could possibly do so. Mats at Ruby, Theo at OpenBSD. Why does this work? Why is this so important? I think this gets back to Fred Brooks's point about the surgical team, the single architect at the top. You really need one mind or a few minds that are really in sync. And so, this is one of the places where breathing exercises come in. If everybody breathes alike, they tend to think alike. Sometimes this is good, sometimes this is bad. Sometimes you need crazy people with crazy ideas, but much of the time, consistency is really important, and this has been something that has been emphasized in our community. So, delegation. We have module owners, people like Raymond. He talked about that yesterday. And we have the other system, which is the benevolent dictator for one PEP. If there's something that's controversial, if there's something that needs to really be thought out before it gets put in, it used to be that Guido had to decide on all those, but Guido got busy, Guido got tired. Not so tired that he doesn't participate anymore. He's around a lot. But he needed other people to do it, and so now there's not a whole flock, but a half a dozen people who get called on regularly, plus the occasional person who I never would have thought of, but Guido pulls out of the crowd and says, you are the delegate for this PEP. Usually somebody who's already been involved in it, but that's been really important. So I don't have that much time left, so I'm going to go on. Channel discipline. And this is part of where we're going on from now. Courtesy is demanded and enforced gently but firmly. Ostracism, banning people from the mailing list and things like that, that does happen, usually for a short period of time. There is one famous case of a permanent ban. We insist that people, or try very hard to get people to post to appropriate channels. If you're talking about using Python, you should go to Python list or the news group comp.lang.python. We have two different programs for teaching people about Python. Python Tutor is how to use it. Core mentorship is mentoring people to become new core developers. And Raymond talked about that on a personal level. Core mentorship is a systematic way for people to come in and meet mentors. You post a core mentorship and somebody in the core will respond and tell you how to do what you need to do or help you with the process and so on. Python ideas and Python dev are slightly different aspects of the core development on the content side, and we have issue tracker and Rietveld for review of code is Rietveld, and the issue tracker, of course, is for people to come in and tell us what's wrong or where there's problems or new ideas. And then we have a thread that is very specific to that. And then we have a bunch of areas that are very important to us, like distutils. How do we get Python out to you? What about the Python package index or the cheese shop, if you're old enough to remember the cheese shop? The email package, which is really important to me. I'm a mailman developer. They all have their own special interest groups. Security is special. Lessons, you probably have figured this out, and I have more important things to talk about. So this consistent long-term self-awareness is what's special about Python, in my opinion. That's what I want to tell you. That we have worked really hard, especially Guido and the leadership has worked very hard to be aware of what we're doing, the problems that occur. We are aware of diversity issues in Python today. I'm a fanboy, as you can tell. I really like the way Python does things, but I'm also open to talking to people, especially women have told me that core development is hardly open. It's not quite toxic, but it's pretty close. And I don't know what they're talking about. So I have to listen harder. If you have ideas, please tell me about it. I'm not exactly in a position to do something, but people who do have that power, people who do have a lot of input, have listened to me in the past about some of these things. The current focus is on improving existing tools. We're still worried about the dev process because, as Raymond said, people have unsubscribed from some of the dev lists because of these long, interminable threads. Mailing lists are so 1990s. I'll be sprinting on Mailman 3 tomorrow. Please come join me. I'm not the best person to do that, but there's lots of work to be done to make that something that Python can use to improve its processes. Inclusion of traditional developer personalities is pretty good. Of course, in many communities, you have these guys and those guys, and they yell at each other, and eventually one set of guys goes away, and you have XEmacs. That's where I came into open source. Or you have OpenBSD or NetBSD. You have these famous splits. We don't have those in Python. Python is very inclusive. We have all kinds of people who have different ideas. We have IronPython, and we have Jython, and we have Cython, and we have PyPy. And it's all pretty much friendly. Sometimes it gets heated when somebody in one of the other communities looks at something in CPython and goes, we can't do that. We can't support that. It's just not possible. And then the negotiation starts. But the negotiation is there, and after that first exasperated shout, it gets polite again. Courtesy in communication is implemented in Python discussions pretty much, and it is widely appreciated. There are a lot of people who come from more toxic cultures who said, this is nice, actually. You know, well, at first they thought it was PC, but then they realize it actually helps get work done. And look at our Python CA chairs. The session chairs are doing a great job telling us who people are, but then they help to make the atmosphere. And for all the volunteers, the people in red shirts, seriously. This is something that I don't see at economics conferences. Chairs are bored. They're there because it helps pay their way to the conference if they can't give a paper. Having people who care, who are excited about being here, introducing other people, just adds so much to the experience. Okay, well, I'm not going to talk about what I wanted to talk about. Well, 16 PEPs in 3.6. Dev is not going to disappear, but it's hard to get stuff in. If it's hard to contribute code, what are we going to do? Well, we have to build community, things like what Raymond was talking about yesterday. So where are we going? Diversity is a value. Guido says so, several keynotes. Guido is not going to push it organizationally. He's doing it individually, like Raymond yesterday talked about his mentees. Guido's doing the same thing. Python's already pretty good for gender balance in some sense. It's not as good as we'd like it to be, but we do see many, many women, more so than in the past. Core dev, on the other hand, is considered to be a disaster area, at least by some. Last year at the Language Summit, there were about 80 people in that room, 50 of them invitees, and then a few of us gatecrashers. But only 2 women. Maybe ethnicity and sexual orientation issues were a little bit better represented, but no polls were taken, so I can't promise that. The concrete plans, we're going to keep talking, and core mentorship, and that's about it for concrete. We need help on this. I talked a little bit about overload. We need to fix that. Python 3, not in scope today. And thank you for listening.
Please don't go anywhere yet. There will be some announcements about what happens after this, but if you have any questions for Stephen, please come on down to the mic.
I kind of expected this. As I say, I'm a professor, and what can I say?
Can you tell us a funny story about the benevolent dictator?
Funny stories about the benevolent dictator. Well, my best story about the benevolent dictator is him slapping me down for telling somebody else what they were doing wasn't Pythonic, but he likes Thai food. More than the benevolent dictator, the story I wanted to tell, I wanted to get Brett up here. Come on up for a second. So one of the things that we have a problem with in Python as far as performance goes is the GIL. You all know about the GIL, right? The Global Interpreter Lock. So Larry Hastings, who's working on getting rid of it, said at the Python Language Summit that you got to be this tall. Okay, even Brett can't work on this one. And that's one of the problems that we face. It's really hard to get rid of the GIL. It's really hard to get threading going in Python. It's really hard to get these things done. And that's why Python is basically at a situation where we're almost feature complete. You can do almost anything you want to do in Python. And doing more than that, you just have to really get into it. And you do have to be not a super coder, but somebody who's willing to put in hours and hours of work. And then on top of that, you're going to have to go through the Python dev bureaucracy and get it into shape so that it doesn't impact performance in other areas. One of the problems with getting rid of the GIL is, Guido says, it better be performant on single-threaded operation. Most of the ideas for getting rid of the GIL kill performance on single-threaded operation. Those are some of the problems that we face these days in getting in new ideas. But it's still possible. 16 PEPs in the last one, and it's not because they were all from Brett, although they all were. Two out of 16.
Any other questions for Stephen? All right, firstly, big round of applause for Stephen, please.